Henry Williams, a 75-year-old pillar of his community, is enjoying his usual morning in the park when a seemingly routine interaction with a young police officer takes a troubling turn. What begins as a simple conversation escalates into a confrontation that shakes the entire neighborhood. As Henry, a man who has spent his life fighting for equality, faces this injustice, the community is forced to confront its own deeper issues. Meanwhile, the officer is challenged to reflect on his actions and the biases he never acknowledged. This emotional story of redemption, justice, and community resilience will leave you wondering, how far will one man go to stand up for what's right? And can true change be achieved after a lifetime of struggle? Curious to find out more? Share your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe to follow this gripping journey. Stay tuned for more powerful stories of hope, change, and redemption. Henry Williams, a 75-year-old black man, sits on his favorite park bench in Maplewood Park, as he does most mornings. The sun is just beginning to rise, casting golden light across the quiet space. Henry, dressed neatly in a cardigan and slacks, holds a cup of coffee in his weathered hands, and his folded newspaper rests on his lap. Birds chirp in the distance, and the air smells fresh, carrying the scent of morning dew. For Henry, this park is a sanctuary. He's lived in this neighborhood for more than 40 years, watched it grow and change, seen people come and go. He remembers the days when the park wasn't open to everyone, when black families were unwelcome. But now, it's a place of peace. Here, Henry can reflect, think about his life, and savor the simple moments, free from the burdens of the world. Joggers and dog walkers begin to appear, filling the paths with activity. Henry smiles as familiar faces pass by. Most offer him polite nods or warm greetings. He is well known here, a figure of quiet dignity in the community. Despite his hunched posture and occasional tremors in his hands, Henry carries himself with strength, a testament to a life well lived. Officer Blake Harrison, a young and eager police officer, walks the park's paths, his eyes scanning the familiar landscape. Maplewood is part of his beat, but today feels different. There's tension simmering beneath the surface of his otherwise routine patrol. Blake feels the pressure of proving himself in the department. His father was a decorated police officer, and Blake has always felt the weight of living up to that legacy. But lately, the job has been wearing on him. He's heard rumors about increased complaints regarding the department's treatment of the community, particularly accusations of racial profiling, but Blake doesn't believe that's true. He's never considered himself biased. He's just doing his job. As he walks, his eyes fall on Henry sitting alone on the bench. The old man's presence unsettles Blake, though he can't quite say why. He's seen Henry here before, but something about this morning makes Blake feel suspicious. Does this man even live here? Blake's training taught him to trust his instincts, and today his instincts tell him to approach Henry. He sets his jaw, adjusts his uniform, and walks toward the bench, his expression serious. Henry looks up from his newspaper as Officer Blake Harrison approaches, a slight frown creasing his brow. He's seen police in the park before, but something about the way this officer walks makes Henry uneasy. Still, he maintains his composure, taking a steady breath as Blake stops in front of him. "Good morning, officer," Henry says with polite formality, though he can feel the tension rising. Blake, arms crossed, doesn't return the greeting. His eyes scan Henry, and after a pause, he asks sharply, "What are you doing here?" Henry blinks in surprise. "Just enjoying my coffee and reading the paper," he replies calmly. "I come here every morning." Blake's tone turns accusatory. "Do you live around here? I've never seen you in this park before." Henry furrows his brow, taken aback by the hostility. "Yes, officer. I've lived just a few blocks away on Maple Street for over 40 years. This park is part of my routine." But Blake's suspicion doesn't ease. "Do you have proof of that?" he asks, his voice laced with doubt. Henry sighs, feeling a familiar tightness in his chest. Not from his heart condition, but from the weight of the situation. This wasn't the first time he had been questioned like this. He takes a deep breath and answers, "I don't carry proof of residence with me when I come to the park, officer. I've lived here for decades." Blake's face contorts with rage. In one swift motion, he grabs Henry's arm, pulling him up from the bench with more force than necessary. Henry gasps as pain shoots through his shoulder. His cane clatters to the ground, and he struggles to keep his balance. "You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer," Blake barks, his grip tightening. Henry's breath comes in shallow gasps as the stress exacerbates his heart condition. "Please," he wheezes, his voice strained. "I'm not resisting." But Blake isn't listening. His handcuffs are already out, ready to restrain Henry. The peaceful morning has spiraled into something far more sinister, and the park, once a place of quiet reflection, now feels like a battlefield. Eli tenses on his bench, his hand tightening around the edge. The scene has escalated far beyond what it should have, and Blake's behavior is growing more aggressive by the second. He knows he can't stay silent much longer. As Blake prepares to place Henry in handcuffs, Eli finally decides it's time to act. He stands from his bench and approaches the confrontation with measured steps, his posture calm but firm. "That's enough," Eli says, his voice steady and commanding. Blake, startled by the sudden interruption, turns to face Eli. His eyes flash with irritation. "This doesn't concern you. Back off." Eli doesn't budge. "You're making a mistake, officer. This man isn't a threat, and he isn't trespassing. He's a respected member of this community." Blake's jaw tightens. "Stay out of it, or I'll arrest you too." But Eli stands his ground, his eyes never leaving Blake's. "You don't want to do this. Let him go." The tension between the three men hangs in the air, thick and heavy. Blake's hand twitches near his holster, and Henry struggles to catch his breath. The moment teeters on the edge of disaster. Just as the situation reaches its breaking point, a firm voice cuts through the tension. "Officer Harrison, stand down." Chief Marcus Walker strides toward them, his presence instantly shifting the dynamic. Blake's face pales as he registers the authority in the chief's voice. Reluctantly, he releases Henry's arm, stepping back with a flushed face. "Chief, Blake begins, but Walker silences him with a look. "Release him," the chief orders, his tone leaving no room for argument. Blake fumbles with the cuffs before stepping back, clearly shaken. Henry, though rattled, stands tall next to the chief, his dignity intact. The crowd that had begun to gather watches in stunned silence, the danger of the situation dissipating with the chief's arrival. Chief Walker turns to Henry, his expression softening. "Are you all right, Mr. Williams?" Henry nods, though his breath is still shallow from the strain. "I'll be fine," he replies, his voice steady but tired. The chief nods, then turns to Blake. "You're done here. Report back to the station immediately." Blake hesitates, but the look in Chief Walker's eyes leaves no room for defiance. He walks away, his steps heavy with the weight of what just transpired. As Blake retreats, the community begins to gather around Henry, offering support and concern. The incident may be over for now, but its impact has only just begun. Henry sits in his living room, his body exhausted from the ordeal, though his spirit remains strong. The morning's confrontation weighs heavily on his mind. He hasn't felt this level of anger and frustration since his younger days. The pain in his chest has subsided for now, but the emotional toll remains. His granddaughter, Maria Thompson, visits him, her face filled with concern. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asks, her voice trembling as she sits beside him. Henry gives her a gentle smile, trying to ease her worry. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he replies, though both of them know the truth is more complicated. Maria's frustration with what happened is palpable. "This isn't right," she says, pacing the room. "You shouldn't have to deal with this, especially not here, in your own neighborhood." Henry sighs, closing his eyes for a moment. "It's not the first time I've faced this kind of thing, Maria," he says softly. "But I thought maybe by now, things would be different." Maria shakes her head. "You've done so much for this community. You helped build that park. You shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone." Henry nods. He knows she's right, but he's reluctant to make a fuss. He's lived through so many battles. Does he really want to fight again? But Maria's next words hit home. "You need to speak out, Grandpa. This is bigger than just you. If it happened to you, it's happening to others. People need to hear your story." Henry falls silent, her words lingering in his mind. He isn't sure he has the energy to fight this fight again, but Maria's passion ignites something within him. Maybe this isn't just about him. Maybe it's about making sure future generations don't have to go through the same struggles. The day after Henry's arrest, the story spreads like wildfire through Maplewood. People in the neighborhood are outraged. Henry has always been a respected figure, a man of integrity who has given so much to the community. The fact that he was treated like a criminal in the very park helped create sparks, anger, and frustration. Rachel Lewis, a local activist and lawyer, takes the lead in organizing a response. She's known Henry for years and has always admired his quiet strength. As soon as she hears what happened, she knows this is a tipping point for the community. Rachel calls a meeting at the local community center. Dozens of residents show up, eager to discuss what happened and what they can do about it. The mood in the room is tense, the air filled with both anger and determination. "We can't let this go unchallenged," Rachel says, standing at the front of the room. "This isn't just about Henry Williams. This is about the systemic racism that still exists in our police force, in our community. We have to demand justice for Henry and for everyone who has been treated this way." The crowd murmurs in agreement. People share their own stories of being mistreated, of being stopped and questioned simply because of the color of their skin. The momentum builds, and before long the group agrees to organize a protest in front of the police station, demanding accountability for Officer Blake Harrison's actions. Blake Harrison sits in his apartment, his mind replaying the events of the previous day. He's been suspended, pending an investigation into his conduct, and he's furious. How could things have escalated so quickly? He was just doing his job, wasn't he? Blake slams his fist down on the table, frustration boiling over. "I didn't do anything wrong," he shouts to no one in particular. But as the silence of his empty apartment closes in on him, doubt begins to creep in. For the first time, Blake allows himself to reflect on the situation from a different angle. Was he really just doing his job, or had he let his assumptions about Henry cloud his judgment? His father had always told him that the badge came with authority, but with authority came responsibility. Was he living up to that responsibility? Blake's phone buzzes with a message from Officer Derek Andrews, his mentor in the department. "Don't worry about it, Blake," the message reads. "People are just blowing this out of proportion. We'll get through it." Blake stares at the screen, conflicted. Derek has always been there for him, but something about his words doesn't sit right. Blake can't shake the feeling that this isn't just going to blow over. The morning of the protest, the streets in front of the Maplewood Police Department are filled with signs, chants, and a diverse crowd of protesters demanding justice for Henry. Rachel leads the charge, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "No justice, no peace," she calls, and the crowd echoes her words with fervor. Maria stands beside her, holding a sign that reads, "Justice for Henry Williams." She feels a mix of pride and fear, pride for standing up for her grandfather, but fear for what might happen next. She's heard stories of protests being met with resistance, but this is personal now. It's her family, her community that's under attack. Henry stays home, watching the protest unfold on the local news. He's grateful for the support, but he still feels torn about speaking out. He's lived long enough to know how quickly things can spiral, how protests can turn into something much larger and harder to control. But as he watches his granddaughter march, his heart swells with pride. Maybe it's time for him to join the fight again. Blake watches the protest from a distance, hidden in his patrol car, even though he's off duty. He wasn't supposed to come, but something about seeing the community gathered in front of the station draws him in. The chants echo in his ears, and as he watches the people, his neighbors, march for justice, a pit forms in his stomach. These aren't just nameless protesters. These are people he's sworn to protect. And there, in the middle of the crowd, is Maria, Henry's granddaughter. Blake's hands tighten on the steering wheel as guilt washes over him. For the first time, he truly sees the impact of his actions. The crowd isn't just angry, they're hurt. And he's responsible for that hurt. His phone buzzes again. It's Officer Andrews. "You seeing this mess?" The message reads, "Just a bunch of people looking to cause trouble. Don't let it get to you." Blake doesn't respond. For the first time, he questions everything Andrews has taught him. Maybe, just maybe, this isn't about troublemakers. Maybe this is about something deeper, something he's been blind to. A few days after the protest, a town hall meeting is held at the Maplewood Community Center to address the growing tension between the police and the community. The room is packed. Residents, police officers, media, and activists fill every seat, with more standing in the back. The air is thick with anticipation. Henry reluctantly takes the stage at the urging of Maria and Rachel. The room falls silent as the elderly man slowly makes his way to the microphone, his cane tapping softly against the wooden floor. He looks out at the sea of faces, many of whom he's known for decades. "I never thought I'd be standing here like this," Henry begins, his voice calm but firm. "I've lived in this community for over 40 years. I've seen this town change, grow. I've always believed that Maplewood was a place where everyone could feel safe. But what happened to me in that park? It's a reminder that we still have a long way to go." Blake, seated in the back, shifts uncomfortably in his seat. Henry's words hit him harder than he expected. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," Henry continues, his voice steady despite the emotions simmering beneath the surface. "I was sitting in a public park, just like I've done for years. And yet I was treated like a criminal. I was made to feel like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood." The crowd murmurs in agreement, their frustration palpable. Henry looks directly at Blake, though he doesn't know where he's sitting. "We need change. We need accountability. And we need to stop making assumptions about people based on the color of their skin." The room erupts in applause, but Blake doesn't join in. His chest tightens as guilt gnaws at him. Henry's calm words cut through his defenses, forcing him to confront the reality of what he did. After the town hall, Blake can't shake the weight of Henry's words. For days, he isolates himself, avoiding phone calls from Andrews and ignoring messages from his colleagues. He's suspended after all. He doesn't need to report in for a while, but the silence only amplifies his thoughts. He replays the incident in the park over and over in his mind. What had started as a routine patrol, an act of enforcing the rules, had spiraled into something much darker. He begins researching, reading articles, watching documentaries on racial profiling and police violence. At first it's uncomfortable, forcing him to confront his own biases. But as he digs deeper, something shifts in Blake. He starts to see the patterns he had once dismissed, the injustices that people like Henry have faced for generations. Blake's world, once so black and white, starts to blur. He realizes he's been living in a bubble, protected by the privilege of his badge, unaware of the harm he's caused. He's ashamed, but he knows shame isn't enough. He needs to do something to make it right. Chief Marcus Walker delivers the news to Officer Blake Harrison in a somber meeting at the station. Blake will be suspended without pay for 6 months, pending further investigation. Chief Walker doesn't sugarcoat the situation. "You crossed a line, Blake," the chief says, his voice measured but firm. "This isn't just about following protocol. It's about how you treated Henry Williams, someone who's lived in this community longer than you've been alive. You acted on assumptions, and that's not how we're supposed to serve the public." Blake listens in silence, knowing there's no point in arguing. He nods, accepting the chief's decision. He has no choice but to face the consequences. But Chief Walker isn't finished. "I'm not just suspending you, Blake," he adds. "You're going to undergo mandatory sensitivity training and community service. This isn't just punishment, it's an opportunity to learn. I hope you take it seriously." Blake swallows hard. He's grateful for the second chance, but he knows that rebuilding his reputation, and more importantly, earning the community's trust, will be a long, uphill battle. As word of Blake's suspension spreads, the community reacts with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. Rachel and Maria continue organizing events, turning the momentum of the protest into a broader movement for change. They hold meetings, invite local officials to speak, and push for policy reforms within the police department. Henry, though still tired from the stress of the situation, finds himself at the center of this movement. People from all walks of life come to him for advice, for inspiration. They see him as a symbol of quiet strength, someone who has weathered countless storms and emerged with his dignity intact. But Henry remains humble. "I'm not doing this for myself," he tells Maria one evening, as they sit on his porch. "I'm doing this for you, for your generation, so you don't have to go through what I went through." Maria smiles, her eyes filled with admiration. "You've already done so much, Grandpa, but we need your voice now more than ever." Blake's first day of mandatory sensitivity training feels like a gut punch. He sits in a small classroom with a handful of other officers, most of them younger and less experienced. The instructor, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, doesn't pull any punches. "This isn't just about ticking boxes or sitting through lectures," she tells the group. "This is about understanding the impact of your actions. You need to recognize the power dynamics at play and how those dynamics affect the people you're supposed to protect." Blake listens, feeling both defensive and humbled. He's not used to being on the receiving end of such criticism. But as the days go on, and the training sessions force him to confront his biases head-on, Blake starts to see things differently. It's not just about Henry anymore. It's about every person he's ever stopped, every interaction that's been colored by his assumptions. He realizes how deeply ingrained those biases are, and how they've shaped his actions as a police officer. By the end of the training, Blake is determined to make amends. He knows he can't undo the harm he's caused, but he can start to do better. And that starts with reaching out to Henry. Blake hesitates outside Henry's house, unsure of how to begin. He's rehearsed what he's going to say 100 times in his mind, but now that he's here, everything feels inadequate. After a deep breath, he knocks on the door. A moment later, Maria answers, her expression unreadable. "Officer Harrison," she says, her voice cool. "What are you doing here?" Blake stammers, feeling the weight of his guilt. "I'm here to see Mr. Williams. I need to apologize." Maria eyes him for a moment, then nods. "Wait here." She disappears inside, and Blake stands on the porch, his heart pounding in his chest. When the door opens again, it's Henry who steps out, his cane in hand. He looks at Blake with a calm, measured gaze. "You wanted to see me?" he asks. Blake takes a deep breath. "Mr. Williams, I came here to apologize. What I did in the park, it was wrong. I didn't see you for who you are, and I let my assumptions get the best of me. I'm truly sorry." Henry listens in silence, his expression thoughtful. When Blake finishes, Henry nods slowly. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, Officer Harrison," he says. "But this isn't just about you and me. This is about a much bigger issue, one that's been around a lot longer than either of us." Blake nods, feeling the weight of Henry's words. "I know. I want to be part of the solution, not the problem. If you'll allow me, I want to help make things right." Henry studies Blake for a long moment, then extends his hand. "It'll take time, but we all have to start somewhere." Blake shakes Henry's hand, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It's the beginning of a long road, but for the first time, he feels like he's on the right path. After Blake's apology, Henry, Maria, Rachel, and a few key community leaders begin working with Chief Marcus Walker on a plan for real change within the police department. The meetings are tense at times, with deep mistrust lingering between the police and the community, but slowly, progress is made. Chief Walker introduces new training programs focused on de-escalation, racial sensitivity, and community engagement. He also implements a community policing initiative, where officers spend time building relationships with the people they serve, rather than just patrolling for crime. Blake volunteers to be part of the initiative, knowing that he has to earn back the community's trust. He attends neighborhood meetings, talks with residents, and listens to their concerns. It's a humbling experience, but it's also a necessary one. As the weeks go by, the divide between the police and the community begins to narrow. It's slow, sometimes painful work, but the changes are starting to take root. Months after the incident in the park, the community organizes a unity rally at Maplewood Park. It's a celebration of the progress that's been made, and a reminder that the fight for justice is ongoing. Henry stands in front of the crowd, surrounded by Maria, Rachel, and the other activists who have led the charge. A mural has been painted on one of the park's walls, depicting Henry standing tall, surrounded by scenes from the civil rights movement and the more recent protests. Blake stands off to the side, unsure of his place in the celebration. But as he watches the community come together, he feels a sense of hope. He knows there's still a long way to go, but for the first time, he believes that real change is possible. When Henry takes the microphone, the crowd falls silent. His voice, though soft, carries the weight of a lifetime of struggle and perseverance. "We've come a long way," he says, looking out at the crowd, "but there's still work to be done. We need to keep fighting for justice, for equality, for each other. This park, this community, is proof that we can make change if we stand together." The crowd erupts in applause, and for a moment, the weight of the past falls away, replaced by a sense of hope for the future. After the rally, Blake approaches Henry once again. This time, the interaction feels different. There's a quiet understanding between them. "Thank you," Blake says, his voice sincere, "for everything." Henry smiles, a small but genuine smile. "Just keep doing the work, Officer Harrison. It doesn't end here." Blake nods. He knows that redemption isn't a single act. It's a journey, and he's only just begun. But with Henry's quiet strength as a guiding force, he feels ready to continue down that path. In the months following the rally, Henry's influence in the community grows. Younger generations, like Maria, look to him for guidance, eager to learn from his experiences and continue the fight for justice. Henry spends his days mentoring young activists, sharing his wisdom and encouraging them to stay on the course. His front porch becomes a gathering place for discussions on civil rights, systemic inequality, and the role of community in shaping the future. For Henry, this is his legacy. Not just the changes in the police department or the protests, but the people he's inspired to keep fighting. He knows that the work will continue long after he's gone, and that gives him hope. As the sun sets over Maplewood Park, casting long shadows across the mural of Henry, there's a sense of renewal in the air. The community, once divided by mistrust and fear, is beginning to heal. People from all walks of life come together, united by a shared belief in a better, fairer future. Henry sits on his favorite bench, watching the park come to life around him. Children play on the grass, families gather for picnics, and joggers pass by with smiles and waves. The park, once a symbol of conflict, has become a place of unity and hope. Henry knows there will always be challenges ahead, but he also knows that the community is ready to face them, together. As he watches the world around him, he feels a quiet sense of peace. This is just the beginning. Blake Harrison stands in front of a room full of neighborhood residents, feeling more nervous than he ever did when he was on patrol. The room is packed with community members of all ages and races, all of them here for the first meeting of the new community policing initiative. It's his first time back in an official capacity since his suspension ended, but his role has changed. Blake's journey over the past few months has been transformative. The sensitivity training opened his eyes to the deep-seated biases within himself and the police force. His conversations with Henry and his time spent in the community have given him a new perspective. Now, standing before these people, many of whom distrust him because of his past actions, he knows this is the most important work of his career. "Good evening," Blake begins, his voice steady but unsure. "My name is Officer Blake Harrison. I know some of you may not want to hear from me, but I'm here to listen and to learn. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because I know we can do better." He scans the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. He sees Maria in the back, watching him closely, her arms crossed. He knows he still has a long way to go before he can earn back his trust or the trust of the community, but this is a start. Blake takes a deep breath and continues, "We're here tonight to talk about how we can bridge the gap between the police and the community. I know I've been part of that gap, and I'm committed to being part of the solution." The meeting is tense, with many residents voicing their frustrations with law enforcement. Some still hold anger toward Blake for what he did to Henry, but as the night goes on, the dialogue begins to shift. People start asking questions, offering suggestions, and for the first time in a long while, there's real communication. By the end of the meeting, Blake feels a sense of hope. It's small, fragile, but it's there, and for him, that's enough to keep going. A few days after the meeting, Blake finds himself on Henry's front porch again. This time, it feels different. There's no confrontation, no tension in the air. Just two men sitting side by side talking about the future. Henry sips his tea, his movements slow but deliberate. "You're doing good work," he says quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "But you have to understand, it's a long road. It's not going to be easy to change the way things are. Not overnight." Blake nods, understanding the weight of Henry's words. "I know, but I'm committed to it. I have to be." Henry chuckles softly. "That's the spirit," he says, giving Blake a sideways glance. "But you also have to remember, you can't fix everything on your own. This is about more than just you or me. It's about all of us." The community Blake absorbs Henry's advice, appreciating the older man's wisdom. For the first time in his career, Blake isn't focused on rising through the ranks or proving himself to his superiors. He's focused on the people like Henry, like Maria, like the families he once overlooked. They sit in companionable silence for a while, the weight of the past month slowly lifting between them. Blake knows he'll never be able to fully atone for what happened in the park, but Henry's willingness to guide him is the most meaningful step toward redemption he's taken yet. Maria, despite her public support of her grandfather's cause, struggles privately with her feelings about Officer Harrison. Every time she sees him, she's reminded of that day in the park, how her grandfather, a man who had given so much to his community, was treated with such disrespect. She can't shake the image of him being pulled off the bench, his cane clattering to the ground. Her frustration boils over one evening after a community meeting, where she spots Blake talking to a group of residents. She knows he's trying, but it feels too little, too late. Why should she forgive him for something that never should have happened in the first place? Later that night, Maria vents her frustrations to her grandfather. "How can you be so calm about this, Grandpa? He hurt you. He treated you like you didn't belong in your own neighborhood." Henry listens patiently, his face calm but serious. "I know you're angry, Maria," he says quietly, "and you have every right to be. But holding on to that anger isn't going to fix anything." Maria shakes her head, pacing the living room. "But it's not fair. He gets to keep his job, and we're the ones who have to move on like nothing happened." Henry sighs, setting down his tea. "It's not about fairness, it's about change. Blake knows what he did was wrong, and he's working to make it right. That's more than I've seen from a lot of people in his position." Maria stops, her anger softening just a little. She knows her grandfather is right. It's just hard for her to let go of the pain, especially when she thinks about how vulnerable Henry was that day in the park. But she also knows that holding on to the hurt won't help her or anyone else. "I don't know if I can forgive him," Maria admits, her voice quieter now. Henry nods. "That's okay. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. But don't let your anger stop you from seeing the progress we're making." Blake throws himself into the community policing initiative, determined to prove that he's more than the sum of his past mistakes. He attends every meeting, patrols the streets without his usual detachment, and begins to forge real relationships with the people he once viewed through the lens of suspicion. One afternoon, while walking his beat in the neighborhood, Blake sees a group of young kids playing basketball at the local park. For a moment he hesitates, unsure if he should approach, if his presence would be welcome. But then he remembers Henry's words. It's about the community. Taking a deep breath, Blake walks over to the basketball court. The kids glance at him warily, but Blake smiles and asks, "Mind if I join?" For a long, tense moment, no one responds. Then one of the older boys shrugs. "Sure, I guess." Blake takes off his uniform jacket, tossing it aside, and joins the game. It's awkward at first, with the kids keeping their distance, but soon the game loosens up, and Blake finds himself laughing along with them. By the end, he's drenched in sweat, but the tension between him and the neighborhood's youth has eased. It's a small step, but as Blake walks away from the court, he feels a glimmer of hope. Maybe he can make things right, one day at a time. Maria has been avoiding Blake for weeks, despite his growing presence in the community. Every time she sees him at a meeting or event, she feels a pang of anger that she can't shake. But after talking to her grandfather, something shifts in her. She realizes that her anger is valid, but it's also holding her back. If her grandfather could work with Blake, then maybe, just maybe, she could try to see him as more than just the officer who hurt her family. At the next community policing meeting, Maria takes a deep breath and approaches Blake after the session ends. He's standing near the exit, talking to a few residents. When he sees her walking toward him, his expression shifts to one of uncertainty, as if he's bracing for a confrontation. "Officer Harrison," Maria begins, her voice even. "Can we talk?" Blake nods, his posture tense but respectful. "Of course." They step outside, the cool evening air providing a welcome contrast to the stuffy meeting room. Maria takes a moment to gather her thoughts, then speaks. "I'm still angry about what happened," she says honestly. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you for what you did to my grandfather, but I've seen the work you're doing in the community and I know you're trying." Blake looks down, his voice quiet. "I am, and I don't expect your forgiveness, Maria. I just want to do better." Maria nods, appreciating his honesty. "I'm not saying everything's okay now, but I'm willing to give you a chance for the community." Blake meets her gaze, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." It's a small step, but it's the first step toward healing for both of them. As the months go by, Henry's role in the community continues to grow. He's become a mentor not just to Maria, but to many young activists who look to him for guidance. His porch is often filled with people eager to hear his stories, to learn from his wisdom. One evening, after a long day of community meetings and planning sessions, Henry sits on his porch, watching the sun set over Maplewood. Maria joins him with a cup of tea in her hands. "You've done so much, Grandpa," she says softly. "People really look up to you." Henry smiles, but there's a hint of weariness in his eyes. "I've just been around long enough to see a few things, that's all." Maria shakes her head. "It's more than that. You've made a difference." Henry chuckles. "Maybe, but the real difference will come from your generation. You're the ones who are going to keep this fight going." Maria falls silent, thinking about the weight of her grandfather's words. She knows he's right. The fight for justice isn't over, and it won't be over for a long time. But with Henry's guidance, she feels ready to continue that fight, to carry the torch forward. As the sun dips below the horizon, Henry feels a sense of peace washing over him. His legacy isn't just in the changes he's seen, it's in the people who will continue to fight for those changes long after he's gone. The community comes together to create a mural in Maplewood Park, honoring Henry's contributions to the neighborhood and the fight for justice. The mural depicts Henry standing tall, surrounded by scenes of the civil rights movement, protests, and moments of unity within the community. Maria and Rachel lead the project, working with local artists and volunteers to bring the mural to life. It's a labor of love, and as the mural takes shape, it becomes a powerful symbol of hope and resilience. On the day the mural is unveiled, the park is filled with people, families, activists, police officers, and residents from all walks of life. Chief Marcus Walker gives a brief speech, acknowledging the progress that has been made, but also the work that still needs to be done. Henry stands in front of the mural, his heart swelling with pride. He never sought attention or accolades, but seeing the community come together like this fills him with a sense of fulfillment. As the crowd applauds, Maria stands beside her grandfather, her arm around his shoulders. "This is your legacy, Grandpa," she whispers, "and it's just the beginning." Henry smiles, knowing that the fight for justice will continue long after this day. The mural is a reminder of that fight, a symbol of everything they've achieved and everything they still have to do. A few weeks after the mural is unveiled, Blake faces his final test as an officer. While on patrol, he encounters a group of teenagers hanging out in the park after hours. In the past, Blake might have approached the situation with suspicion, assuming the worst. But now, after everything he's learned, he takes a different approach. He walks over to the group, his posture relaxed, his voice calm. "Hey guys," he says, his tone friendly. "Park's closing soon. Everything okay?" The teenagers look at him warily, but Blake doesn't push. He waits, giving them space to respond. One of the boys steps forward. "Yeah, we're just talking. We'll head out soon." Blake nodded, smiling. "No problem. Take your time, just be safe." As he walks away, he feels a sense of satisfaction. It's a small moment, but it represents the change he's been working toward. The shift from authority to understanding, from confrontation to community. Blake knows that this is how policing should be. About building trust. About protecting and serving without prejudice. It's a lesson that took him too long to learn. But now that he has, he's determined to never forget it. As the community policing initiative continues to grow, Blake becomes a key figure in its success. He works closely with Chief Walker and the community leaders to ensure that the changes they've made are lasting and meaningful. But Blake also knows that this is just the beginning. There's still so much work to be done, both within the police department and the community. He's committed to being part of that work, to continuing to listen, learn, and grow. One evening, Blake visits Henry at his home just to talk. They sit on the porch together, watching the stars come out. "You've come a long way," Henry says, his voice filled with quiet pride. Blake smiles. "Thanks to you." Henry chuckles. "I didn't do anything special. Just helped you see what was already there." Blake nods, understanding what Henry means. The lessons he's learned over the past year have always been there, but it took people like Henry to show him the way. As they sit in silence, Blake feels a sense of peace. He knows that the road ahead will be long and challenging, but with people like Henry guiding him, he's ready for whatever comes next. Maria stands at the front of the community center, speaking to a group of young activists who have come to learn about organizing for social justice. She's become a leader in her own right, following in her grandfather's footsteps but carving out her own path. "We have to keep pushing," she tells the group, her voice filled with passion. "Change doesn't happen overnight. But if we stay committed, if we keep fighting, we can make a difference." As she speaks, she thinks of her grandfather, of everything he's taught her. His quiet strength, his patience, his wisdom, they've shaped her into the person she is today. After the meeting, Maria returns home to find Henry sitting on the porch as usual. She sits beside him, feeling the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. "You did good today," Henry says, his voice filled with pride. Maria smiles. "I learned from the best." Henry chuckles, patting her hand. "You're going to do great things, Maria. I know it." Maria leans her head on her grandfather's shoulder, feeling a sense of peace. The future is uncertain, but with her grandfather's legacy to guide her, she knows she's ready for whatever comes next. The community policing initiative has been a success, with real changes taking root in Maplewood. Officers and residents alike have begun to rebuild trust, working together to create a safer, more inclusive community. Blake continues to play a key role in the initiative, mentoring younger officers and helping them understand the importance of empathy and respect in their work. He's learned that being a good officer isn't just about enforcing the law, it's about understanding the people he serves. One day, while walking his beat, Blake runs into Maria in the park. They exchange a smile with a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. It's a sign that the walls between them are finally starting to come down. As Blake watches Maria walk away, he feels a sense of closure. The journey he's been on has been difficult, but it's brought him to a place of understanding and growth. He knows that there's still work to be done, but for the first time, he feels like he's on the right path. As Henry sits on his porch watching the sun set over Maplewood, he reflects on everything that has happened over the past year. The incident in the park, the protests, the changes in the police department. It's been a long, difficult journey, but one that was necessary. He thinks about the younger generation, Maria, Rachel, and all the young activists who are continuing the fight for justice. They've taken up the torch that his generation carried, and Henry knows they'll carry it forward with strength and determination. For Henry, this is what it's all about, leaving behind a legacy of hope, of progress, of change. He's lived a long, full life, and though there's still work to be done, he feels a sense of peace knowing that the future is in good hands. The mural in Maplewood Park has become a symbol of the community's resilience and unity. People come from all over to see it, to take pictures, and to reflect on the progress that has been made. One afternoon, as Henry walks through the park, he stops in front of the mural. A group of children are playing nearby, laughing and running around without a care in the world. Henry watches them, a smile on his face. The mural depicts scenes of protest, of unity, of change. And at the center of it all is Henry, standing tall. It's a reminder of everything the community has been through, and a testament to the power of perseverance. Henry knows that the fight for justice is never truly over, but for now, he feels a sense of accomplishment. The mural isn't just about him, it's about the community, about the people who came together to make a difference. As he stands in front of the mural, Henry feels a sense of peace. This is his legacy, and it's one he's proud of. The changes in Maplewood have been slow but steady. The police department, once a source of fear and distrust, has begun to rebuild its relationship with the community. Officers like Blake are working to ensure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated, and residents are starting to feel safer in their own neighborhoods. The unity that has grown out of the struggles over the past year is palpable. People from all walks of life come together to support one another, to build a better future for their children. It's not perfect, but it's progress. At a town hall meeting, Chief Walker addresses the community. "We've come a long way," he says, "but we still have a lot of work to do. We're committed to continuing this journey with you, and we're committed to making Maplewood a place where everyone feels safe and respected." The crowd applauds, and for the first time in a long while, there's a sense of optimism in the room. The future may be uncertain, but for now, the community is moving in the right direction. Blake and Henry sit together on Henry's porch, sharing one final conversation before Blake leaves for a new training program. Blake has been selected to attend a de-escalation and community-building training seminar where he'll learn new skills and bring them back to Maplewood. "I just wanted to say thank you," Blake says, his voice filled with emotion. "You've taught me so much, and I wouldn't be where I am today without your guidance." Henry smiles, his eyes twinkling with pride. "You've done the hard work, Blake. All I did was point you in the right direction." Blake chuckles, but there's a seriousness in his tone. "I know I still have a lot to learn, but I'm ready. I want to keep making a difference." Henry nods. "That's all any of us can do. Keep trying. Keep pushing for change." They sit in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of their shared journey hanging in the air. Blake feels a sense of closure, but also a renewed sense of purpose. He knows that this isn't the end of his story, it's just the beginning. As the sun sets over Maplewood, casting a golden glow over the park and the mural, the community feels a sense of hope. The journey has been difficult, and there are still challenges ahead, but the progress they've made is undeniable. Maria continues to lead the fight for justice, working with young activists and community leaders to push for lasting change. Blake, now a respected member of the police force, uses his platform to advocate for empathy, understanding, and respect in law enforcement. And Henry, though older and slower than he used to be, watches it all unfold with quiet pride. His life's work has been about more than just himself. It's been about the community, about the people he loves, and about the future they're building together. As Henry sits on his porch, watching the world around him, he knows that the fight for justice never truly ends. But he also knows that the future is in good hands. And for the first time in a long while, Henry feels a deep, abiding sense of peace. In the final months of his life, Henry sat on his familiar porch chair, watching the community he had spent a lifetime building and protecting. He saw unity, hope, and positive changes starting to take root. Maplewood, once divided by misunderstandings and prejudice, was now moving forward, embracing a future filled with promise. Maria, Blake, Rachel, and many other young people carried on Henry's legacy, leading the fight for justice and equality. Maplewood Park, once the site of a painful confrontation, had become a symbol of resilience and solidarity. The mural of Henry standing tall was a reminder that while the path to justice may be difficult, change is always possible through perseverance and faith. With a smile on his face and peace in his heart, Henry knew that his journey had left a lasting impact, not just on his family, but on the entire community. He had passed the torch to those who would continue the fight he had started. As the sun set in the park and the mural cast long shadows across the familiar paths, Henry knew the work was far from over. But he also knew that the future was in good hands. And with that, Henry found peace in the knowledge that change, though slow, was inevitable. If this story moved you, there's more to come. Hit the subscribe button and join our growing community of readers who seek stories that inspire, challenge, and uplift. By subscribing, you'll be the first to find out about the latest releases, stories that remind us of the power of resilience, redemption, and community. Together, we can keep the conversation about justice and change alive.